Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of The Board. Today we are going to be talking about some of the changes in the Scrum guide which have come about recently, and we'll also be talking about our workshop that we had last week with Lynne Cazaly and how we've actually already started using some of that stuff in our actual day-to-day work. We had some gremlins earlier on. Hopefully we're all live and good to go. And please do ask any questions throughout the show at any point, because we really enjoy that sort of feedback and interaction. I'm Gavin Coughlin, Agile Coach. I'm here with...
Nicely done. Kirsten Donaldson, and this is Paul Llewellyn.
Hello.
Yep.
Hello.
So, Lynne Cazaly, she came over last week. She did a talk at Agile Welly, which was about thinking visual, and she also did a workshop here at Boost, which is a day-long course, and she took us through some of her methods and techniques for thinking visual. It was a really fun course.
It's great. There's a couple of different ways that we've found that we can use it. So for example, if we're doing workshops, we can illustrate some concepts with some visuals, but the thing I found it quite useful for the other day, just on a personal level, was I'd had a chat with a client about some work, and I was putting together a proposal, and I thought I'll just draw that up this evening, and then when I come into work tomorrow I'll be able to write it quite quickly. I think we've got the visual that I drew, if Joe can put that up.
Could you refresh that as well? I'm not convinced that...
Sure. So the visual that I drew just sort of detailed the parts of the proposal. Just check if we're actually online. The parts of the proposal that I need to write up. It just really helped to prompt my memories of what I'd talked to the client about, and helped me put together that proposal really quickly. So you've got the 4 different components there.
What I really enjoyed about Lynne's workshop was when she, at the beginning of the workshop, she asked us to say where we were now, and so we just kind of, we sat down and we listened to some, I don't know whether it was a podcast or an audio that she had, or
it was Lynne reading out a newspaper article about house travel.
And then we took notes, as we usually took notes, you know, at the it's just long lists for me, long lists of
it was just
detail.
scrolls for me with a couple of asterisks.
And I kind of started, once I'd run out of space, I kind of started mind mapping stuff around the edges, but it wasn't really a mind map. It was just a mess of lots of random words and stuff that I somehow connected with lines and stuff. But so that was the beginning of the day, and then by the end of the day, she had us going through a number of exercises where we were listening to TED Talks. And the TED Talks were, you know, we had to take the notes in real time, and then present our notes, our visual notes, back to the class afterwards. And
that was practice, wasn't it?
Yeah, really good practice.
Yeah. And
really, analysing how people present. You know, there was that one TED Talk where they're just going over, they're just reiterating the same subject over and over again. That was really easy. Yeah. And then there was the 10-minute talk where they just kind of went off on. It was just like a long...
Actually, I found that the first one a little more difficult. Even though the person was reiterating the same concept, I thought there's going to be some overall point here. I was waiting, but actually got to the end, and it just was the same thing over and over again. And I found I didn't have much up there.
Yep.
And one thing that I noticed when I was away and seeing lots of presentations as well was I'd be taking down notes during a presentation, just all words, and then I'd be left with, you know, a couple of pages of just, you know, black text or whatever. And Nathan was beside me, and he was taking notes in this visual way, and his were just much more engaging, and it got all the major points, but in a, like I said, much more engaging, but also just you could tell what it's about at a glance rather than having to read through pages and pages of text.
I think the visual that we just showed was just one page with the sort of 4 points illustrated on there. I'd taken 4 or 5 A5 pages of notes from that meeting. To have it distilled down to one page at a glance was amazing.
Yeah.
You know, and not to have to go back through those notes and attempt to read my scribbly handwriting that I'd written very fast during the meeting. And it, you know, I didn't need to refer back to them to do the visual, because I had the meeting an hour or two previously, so I was able to do it from my head. And then having the graphical things there, you can see at a glance what you meant, rather than having to read through.
And obviously it's great when you're doing presentations to people on a whiteboard or on flip charts or anything, because in the past it might just look like a scroll when you're talking, because you're doing things too quickly and you're really concerned about getting everything up really quickly, and Lynne sort of taught you to slow down a little bit, take a breath, and every time you do a stroke on a letter, for example, take your hand off the board each time. So it just teaches you to take a little bit more time and write more legibly. And
that was a really good tip for the handwriting, because I tend to do capitals but joined up.
Yeah.
So, you know, actually thinking about taking your hand off the board or the piece of paper makes it a lot neater.
A lot neater, yeah, and slows you down enough
Yeah.
to make your writing
Yeah, that's
legible.
frustrating, but
I've got
it does help.
my writing goes from legible to illegible quite quickly when I'm presenting.
The other really good tip she had was when you don't know what to draw next, just turn around and draw a circle.
Yeah.
And collect your thoughts while you're doing that. I thought that was an amazing tip.
Yeah. And
you
so
know that time away from all the eyes on you does allow you to focus a little better. And then she said, she gave us a couple of examples where she's done this and has found that then she ends up using the circle and things start to flow again.
Yeah. So what's in the conversation, what's outside of the conversation, what's in the circle, what's outside of the circle.
Yeah,
that's the
there's
metaphor.
always something you can do with a circle, apparently.
Yeah.
And I did a thing recently where I talked to you guys about some of the changes in the Scrum guide, and did it visually, so tried out a lot of Lynne's techniques as well, and I think we have an example of that. And I don't know if you guys were there watching it. I was
when you did it,
yeah.
When we were filming it? No, I did not see that.
Well, you were there. Were you not there for the first part?
version.
Yeah. Which was the same. I just redid it for the video, really. But was that more engaging than me just talking about it and writing out bullet points?
Absolutely. And you know, to come back to, it's much easier to remember what you were talking about as well.
Yeah, totally.
You know, obviously that could be a little bit bigger, but we're going to put some stuff up about this on the blog.
Yes. Yeah.
Is that going to be a video of you doing this, drawing and speaking about it?
Yeah. So I'll put a link up on the blog to the. I think Joe, you put it up on video. Joe's our techie in the background, doing a great job, Joe. And yes, he will give you the link to that on Vimeo if you want to have a look at it, or send it on to anybody who's interested about the changes in the Scrum guide.
So we'll put it on the board.
Yep.
At the end. Yeah, great. So that brings us nicely onto the Scrum guide. Nice segue.
Yes, thank you.
So we've been looking at that this week and going a little bit more in depth with that, and thinking about how it's going to affect our projects and sorts of things we might need to change.
Yeah. And there's 6 major changes or minor changes. Some of them are just semantics and wording, really, and some of them are a little bit more major.
Yeah.
There's no huge overhaul or anything in the new Scrum guide.
And some of them, we naturally fell into doing. We just didn't.
Yeah.
We just naturally did that anyway.
I think it's worth going through each one and having a few words about it.
Yeah. I think that's a wonderful idea, Kirsten.
Yeah, I actually have a piece of paper right here with it written on. So we start with the
transparency of artifacts.
Transparency, yes, exactly. I mean, for us, obviously, with our sprint backlog, we've always had that very visible and very transparent with our boards around the place and some online tools. But this is talking about making the entire product backlog
transparent.
Transparent and available
to the team, essentially, but also to other to stakeholders as well, I believe.
Yeah.
And I think it's about having the product backlog not only visible and the sprint backlog visible, whether it's in physical and electronic format, but also making it transparent so everybody has a shared understanding of what each story actually means. So it's not just about making it visible. So it's partly about that, but also making sure that everybody knows what it's about and what's going on.
So what are some ways that we can make our product backlogs more transparent to wider groups?
Well, we have this thing that user stories should be written in the language of the person who's using our software, so the customer or the client or the user of the software. So that's one way, is not to have technical stories, but to show it from the user's perspective and write it in the language they understand. Yeah. So that, for me, is the first step to transparency, so you can understand exactly what a story is intending to do, no matter what your background.
I think even if when you're refining your backlog, people are just aware of what stories are actually coming up, and when a story is added to the product backlog by, say, the product owner, it's not just added in secrecy. They add it and they say, oh, by the way, I added a few stories and they're about blah 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 blah. You don't have to go too much into them because they might be. It depends where they sit in the priority list, I suppose.
Because they may not be fully written.
Yeah, exactly. But but just making sure that those things are all fully understood by everybody else.
Our one of our product owners, they have different sections in their product backlog that they've tagged to show where stories, so that stories that have been sized and ready to go into the sprint are at the top, and then they have another section which is stories waiting to be sized, another section which is stories not ready to be sized yet, and so on. And they just have just lots of little areas that you can clearly see which stories, what category they're in.
And that's quite a high degree of transparency in terms of stating exactly where they're at, so that people can tell at a glance which ones they should be paying attention to. And
they'll often tag a story with, needs to be worked on, or need help from Scrum, or something like that.
Okay. And the second point that they're changing the Scrum guide is they used to divide the sprint planning into 2 meetings. And the first part of it was really about analysing, and the second part was about actually doing the planning itself. But now they're just recommending one section to that meeting, and it's just a sprint planning meeting, which is something that we've fell into ourselves anyway. I think it's a very natural thing to do.
We did start off with the 2 meetings, 2 separate meetings, and the sprint planning part 1 and part 2. But we quickly fell into just having one meeting where we did essentially the same activities, but rolled it into the
meetings. But it's more streamlined, isn't it?
A bit more streamlined. It just felt more natural. Like I said, we just naturally fell into it. You know? We tended to, rather than commit to a number of stories and then start tasking, we'd look at a story, read it, assess what it was, task it up, and then commit, and then move to the next story, do the same. So we were working through the stories one by one until we got to a point where the team was happy and committed,
And actually that works quite nicely with the idea of stories being a whole slice of functionality. So you're actually doing all the work you need to do on that story before moving to the next one.
That's right.
Rather than doing half the job down a line and then in another meeting doing the other half of the job.
Actually, one word you said there that's interesting, and it's another thing that was changed in the Scrum guide a while back, was committing is now not committing, it's forecasting.
Right.
As opposed to committing, which is is a small difference. Again.
Okay. Remember that.
So the sprint planning is just one meeting, and another important thing that comes out of sprint planning that's specified or emphasised in the Scrum guide now is the need to come up with a sprint goal. So once the team have forecasted the amount of stories that they can actually do in that sprint, they then define a sprint goal, that sort of an overarching sprint goal for all those stories. I was watching a video just before this by Jeff Sutherland and Ken Schwaber where they talk about that, and they said even if you come up with a really vague sprint goal like do all this stuff, they said that's probably not the best recommendation.
Is that the words they used?
Yes, they said but obviously I wouldn't recommend it be that vague. But you don't, as long as you come up with a sprint goal that all those stories can be sort of supporting.
I have a question about this. Does this mean having a bunch of stories that have a common theme, or could you have some that are quite disparate?
You can have disparate stories, so but you do still want your sort of a concise sprint goal.
So
over
would
there
the sprint goal then be something like I don't know, develop this area and this area?
Yeah.
I think it's a bit. I can understand why they put the sprint goal after the forecast is complete, but I've always asked product owners for a sprint goal in front of the forecast or the commitment,
so they can organise their stories accordingly. So it does have a theme, and
then they can say,
that makes sense.
and then if the sprint goal isn't achievable because the team don't feel like they can they can commit to or forecast all of the stories
all of those,
that the product owner was hoping for, then the product owner can shift their priorities to meet the sprint goal or still meet the sprint goal. So I've always asked for sprint goals up front, and then shifted the. We've talked about it as it's another conversation to be had if the stories that are actually in the sprint backlog aren't going to meet that.
It really depends on the intention of the sprint goal. Is the sprint goal something that the product owner wants to achieve for the sprint, or is the sprint goal something that is achieved by the stories that are in the sprint that the team needs to know about and be aware of?
Part of the sprint goal, part of the reason for bringing that in afterwards, there's a larger emphasis on sprint goal in the new Scrum guide overall. I don't know if you want to jump to the fifth change in the Scrum guide, which kind of explains why this is. Because in the daily stand-up, you used to have and that's the fifth point on that image that you're seeing there now. So the stand-up, you used to go along and you stand up and you say what I did yesterday, what I'm going to be doing today, and if there's any impediments in my way.
Yeah.
But that seemed to turn into just a status update, and people could say, well, what did I do today? Well, I had to write a report for so and so, and they could actually talk about stuff that they did yesterday that doesn't even relate to stuff on the board because I got pulled off to do other jobs. But the question...
True, now it is much more focused.
Yeah.
You got the question down pat, do you want to tell us?
I haven't got it down pat, I don't think you have to have it down pat, but
It's really descriptive.
It is, but the question is, what did I do yesterday that helped the development team meet its sprint goal? And what will I do today that's going to help the development team reach its sprint goal? And are there any impediments in the way that will stop either me or the development team from reaching the sprint goal? And it just makes sure that people talk specifically about what's on the board and how they're getting closer towards that sprint goal.
So it's really refining their focus a bit more.
Yeah,
that's right.
And making sure that they're really talking about
achieving
something specific.
That's right, and I like the emphasis on the sprint goal. I mean, I've always emphasised to teams that they, the stand-up is about coordinating the work to complete the work that's on the board or meet their commitment or their forecast. And I've always said that to the team, but now it really emphasises that some stories aren't necessarily going to contribute to the sprint goal. And they should focus. Hopefully, the stories that are at the top of the sprint backlog are the ones that will help them achieve that sprint goal, and they should focus on achieving the highest priority stories.
Yeah, and the meeting is a time where people not only coordinate, but they can help each other and help accelerate things towards reaching that sprint goal as well. So it's not just. And I think if your stand-ups are going really well and people are doing that at the moment, you can keep asking those 3 questions, I feel. But if you feel that your stand-up has gotten a little bit shoddy and people aren't focusing on what they should be focusing on, I think it might be a good time it is a good time to actually bring in these revised questions.
I think we need to make a point of making the sprint goal visible on the workspace or asking the team.
That's a good idea as well.
I mean, it's the team's board, but I think they need to see the sprint goal to keep the focus.
I think that's a good idea. So one of the other things that came out of the Scrum Guide changes, anyone that really sticks on one at the moment, is the change of terminology around backlog, which was previously known as grooming. It's now going to be known as backlog refining. We've heard a few different words for this over the last
tuning,
year or two.
Tweaking,
tuning,
gardening,
tweaking.
Gardening,
twerking.
No, I don't think we've heard twerking.
But the reason they've changed backlog grooming is just because of feedback they've gotten from people in his part of the world, where it means something.
That's the UK, obviously.
That's the British.
Yes, where it means something altogether different, and it has bad connotations, I suppose.
Thank the tabloids for taking over that word.
Daily Mail readers.
Exactly.
And I think then also people from the US tend to regard it as directly referring to grooming, such as doing your hair and things like that. I've certainly heard when I went on that Lynne workshop with the Pop and Decks, they were like, oh, it always reminds me of like doing your hair or a monkey taking a person's hair.
And so now it's backlog refining, which is seems like it's.
I mean, it does what it says.
It does what it says, and. There's also a lot of emphasis at the moment about stories being ready in the Scrum Guide. So you refine your stories until they're ready, and you should have these backlog refining meetings. So by the time it comes to sprint planning, they are ready. They have been refined and now they're ready. So that sprint planning can really kick off, and you don't have to do all that work within sprint planning as well. And it should go a lot more smoothly if these stories are actually at that ready state.
Doesn't preclude team members from making suggestions about the stories.
No,
adding acceptance criteria along the way. But they should be ready to go. So what have we missed? Meetings.
They talked about meetings as well. And again, this is just common sense, I think. So they say in the past, they said Scrum Guide. So I think that's point number 4 there. And they said that for a month-long sprint, your planning sessions should be 8 hours. For a 2-week sprint, should be 4 hours. But they're a little bit vague about that. So what they're saying now is that your sprint planning, if it's a month-long sprint, it should be a maximum of 8 hours. But really, it takes as long as you need. So
this is common sense, though, isn't it? I mean, the point of time box is so that there is a a limit of time, so you're productive. It's not filling in time to work up to that time. I've never regarded it as such.
I couldn't imagine an 8-hour meeting, to be honest.
No.
I wouldn't survive an 8-hour meeting.
But,
4-hour meeting also.
I value short meetings. I really like short meetings. And once you get to the point, get out. And because you have a 2-hour meeting booked, if you've done an hour and a half and you're finished, I don't see any reason at all for actually saying, well, actually we still have half an hour left, guys, so let's...
Yeah, I mean, we've never done that.
We've never done that.
A quick thing here, Tony's mentioned that the Scrum Guide actually mentions a definition of ready explicitly now.
That's right.
They actually detailed what ready
means,
or they talked about devising a definition of ready up front kind of thing.
So that that's an interesting point actually, because they do talk about something being ready, but and we at Boost have always come up with a definition of ready before a project starts. So we come up with a definition of done and the definition of ready, and it's just very useful for when the team needs to, or the project owner knows when a story is ready to actually be started work on.
That's right, and the team knows when it's ready to be worked on. Or and so like Gavin says, we've always done that here. We've always had a definition of ready as part of our team charter. So I don't think the Scrum Guide would prescribe what definition of ready means, because
just that to have one.
Just to have one.
I think it's great that it's been made explicit that it should exist, because it's very, very useful. And when we do our intro to Scrum workshops here, we stick to what's in the Scrum Guide, and we don't really talk about definition of ready in there. We do talk about it in our user stories workshop, but it'd be great to actually bring that into the...
I mean, we'll be making a few changes to our intro. Some time anyway for these Scrum Guide changes. And in fact, we might even do the whole thing by thinking visually at some point soon.
We've been talking about doing the intro to Scrum with no slides and just
the only thing I worry about with that is that people like to have the slides afterwards. I mean, would we send them pictures of the visuals afterwards?
I think we might still update just give them the slides, because the slides have the information all bullet pointed, so still offer that up afterwards.
But just don't play it behind us at the time.
We'll figure that one out, I think.
I'm looking forward to seeing that.
Me too. So that brings us up to the very last point, which is where they're talking about value, and they're putting in a stronger emphasis on value in the Scrum Guide as well, and they have talked about the sprint review meeting in particular, and sprint review is not just a demo, and that's something that we emphasize here as well, that a sprint review isn't just somebody standing up and saying, hey, this is what we did, 1, 2, 3. It's somewhere where you get... It's
a conversation, and you invite your stakeholders, and you get people talking about what the product's doing and how... And
what it might potentially do in the future.
That's right. And, it drives some more stories onto the product backlog.
That's right, because you should have, I suppose, a reshaped product backlog after a review, or you can do, and people should be asking, so what does this mean, this bit of functionality, and where to next, and ask those sort of questions at a sprint review. And that should either inspire stories in the product backlog, or even stuff to talk about in the retrospective, or even just experiments to put in place. So there's lots of things that can come out the sprint review.
I'm glad they've changed the guide to emphasise this, because we often get questions where the product owners say, well, what's the point of us having a review meeting? We've already seen the stories, they've already been accepted. We don't need to go through them again. But of course, now it's changed the focus of this meeting to you actually want feedback from the wider group.
Is this, you guys are doing projects where you're Scrum Mastering and Agile coaching at the moment. Is this something you'll be making explicit to your product owners about the review now?
Yeah, I'm making all of these changes explicit.
So you'll be going through it with
That's
them.
right. Some of the guys have been, for example, the stand-up, the 3-question stand-up, people are saying those questions are ridiculously long, how can we answer that question? Or how can we start with that question? But, I just keep reminding them at the beginning of every stand-up. They don't need to say the question out loud. They just need to answer the question.
Know what they're answering.
That's right.
Yeah. I thought, it'd be great to just have the questions stuck up on the board, actually.
Yeah.
Just for the first wee while, they'll get used to it, and they'll know what they're answering after they've done it a number of times.
That's right.
And actually, back to that, because I have seen a lot of stand-ups where people do start to waffle and things get a little bit all over the place, and because if you're on one Scrum team for a number of months and you're a highly functioning Scrum team, those questions seem to drop out and people just answer those questions. They stand up. You don't have to actually ask them to people. But then sometimes people can get things can get a little bit chaotic and a little bit unwieldy. So it is a good time to introduce actually asking those questions explicitly.
I think it's a good time to bring the questions back in if that is happening.
Yeah.
Or even just having them on the board and just saying, as a reminder, these are the questions that we're answering each day.
Yeah.
And this, obviously, this is a good time to bring that in with the new questions to remind people.
That's right. And so I'll be making all of these changes. I'll be emphasising that they're changed. Like product backlog refinement and so on.
So you'll be changing your calendar appointments.
I'm changing my calendar appointments. Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it is quite important that we do all speak with the same terminology, so we all know what we're talking about.
Oh, that's right. And I mean, because we're not only practitioners of Scrum here, but we also try to share our knowledge of it. So we have to be on board with basically what the Scrum Guide says and what people around the world are thinking about it as well. So we'll definitely be making those changes. And there's nothing, like I said, nothing too drastic in there, nothing too crazy. It's not turning Scrum upside down or anything. It's just common sense adjustments.
And like Paul was saying earlier, it's some of the things we've already started doing because it is part of our evolution with Scrum, isn't it?
That's right.
Which is obviously happening
within
the wider Scrum community as well.
Yeah.
It's good.
Cool. So that's it.
That's it for this week. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, and just one thing I'd like to add, actually, just before Joe makes a picture disappear. If anybody has stuff that they'd like us to discuss on the board in any future episodes, let us know in the comments on this episode, and we'll try to shape some episodes around that. Okay.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.